vertical bundle is a bundle of willows laying vertically up the bank so that the bottoms of the cuttings are in the stream bed and the tops of the cuttings are ideally 8 to 12 inches above the top of the bank. In vertical bundles, the cuttings are all oriented the same way, facing up, and we use vertical bundles in areas where it would be very difficult to dig holes to plant into, maybe where you have a lot of cobble or the soil is very compressed, or maybe in a place where it's really important not to disturb the soil, because in either case, you only need to dig a slight trench. And so this is one of the main advantages, is that you don't need to do a lot of soil disturbance, and if it's too hard to dig, you're not going to need to anyways. So these vertical bundles are used to increase roughness, which then reduces the velocity of the stream, facilitating sediment deposition. This is a great way to install willows all the way from the stream bed up to the top of the bank, all in one installation. The tools for this job are beautifully simple. We have a pair of pruners for harvesting willow cuttings, trimming up the sides, trimming off the top 2 feet, and also for cutting our rope, which brings us to our rope. You may notice some controversy around what to use to tie your bundle together. We're going to recommend cotton rope because it's biodegradable and it's really easy to tighten, and it's just easy to work with. Then you need something to drive the wedge in with, such as a mallet or hammer, and you may want to have some gloves. Pretty simple equipment for a very effective technique. You can soak your willows in the creek or in a garbage can where they are as fully submerged as possible for at least 24 hours, but up to 2 weeks. If they are fully submerged, then they shouldn't sprout. You want to make sure they're nice and wet when you start off and they've been soaking. You're going to build your vertical bundle using 3 to 5 cuttings. If you have a smaller diameter cutting, then you would put more, maybe up to 5. If you have a larger diameter, then you would have just 3 of them. That's because you want stem to soil contact around as much of the stem as possible. So you don't want your bundle to be too big. So first off, we actually need to trim off the top 2 feet or so of these stems because that's where they're really going to produce the vast majority of the buds, but we don't want that. We want them to produce a lot of roots. So by removing the top 2 feet of the cuttings, we are going to stimulate root growth. Next, we're going to tie these 3 cuttings into a bundle, and we're going to do it in 3 places. The first is about a foot or so from the base, the second is in the middle, and the third is about a foot from the top. And we discovered we need to go around at least how many times? At least 3 times. Because otherwise there's so much pressure that when you drive the stake in, you will end up seeing your knot come apart. And then we'll do a double knot. Hold it in place. How did it go with your knot? Okay, now we have a bundle. If you are assembling a lot of bundles at once, you're going to want to keep them wet while you work. Don't leave them out to dry. You can soak them in the creek or you can soak them in a garbage can. This is a preview of where the dead stout stakes will be installed. If you have 3 ties, then you're going to use 2 stakes. You always place the stout stakes in between 2 ties where you have the greatest tension, and that is so that you can pin your bundle to the bank. And so you would never install a stake above the top tie, and you would never install a stake below the bottom tie. You simply don't have the tension there to be able to hold your bundle into the bank. Once you've chosen a location to install your bundle, you're going to dig a trench that is only as deep as the diameter of your bundle. So with a bundle that is not very big in diameter, you're not going to need a very deep trench, and you're not going to need to disturb the bank very much. If you have vegetation, you're going to remove it. We are working on a largely unvegetated bank here to begin with, and just gently carving out a trench. And you can see how this trench is just deep enough to accommodate the bundle so that we can get maximum stem to soil contact at various points across the bundle. It's important that the base of your vertical bundle is installed in water because that's going to be the primary source of hydration while the willow develops a root system all along the bank. And it will always be an important source of hydration for the whole bundle. Okay, now that the base is installed in the water and the bundle is laying in its new little trench, it's time to pin this vertical bundle to the bank so that even if during high flows water washes across it, it's going to stay in place. So we're going to use these dead stout stakes, and they're made from taking 2-foot lengths of 2x4 and cutting them crosswise into 2 triangles. The orientation of the wedge is really important. You always want to make sure you're installing it sideways like this so that as you drive the wedge in, it is creating more and more tension and holding that bundle to the bank. If I were to put it in this way, it would defeat the purpose of having a wedge. So make sure that you're placing your wedge in between the 2 ties and that as you drive it in, it's functioning as a wedge. And that you should see the bundle spreading around the wedge as you drive it in. Okay, and that is really firm. It's not going anywhere. Okay, second wedge, similar idea. Make sure you're placing the bundle in the trench that you made. And then we're going to this wedge in between the branches. Again, oriented so that it functions as a wedge. And drive it in. Alright, so this bundle feels very secure. I'm going to test it in a few different spots. Try and wiggle it. I can feel that it's very securely pinned to the bank. Now the last step is going to be to add a muddy slurry, and you're going to add it in kind of a mosaic pattern so that you have some places that are covered and some places that are uncovered. So the more you do this, the more you'll get a sense of the consistency that you want for your slurry. You can get a bucket and fill it with some sediment from the bank or the stream bed and mix it with water until it's the consistency of like a syrup. Or you can just mix up some mud that you can sort of take on there as you go. The main idea is to have the stems covered in some places and open in other places, because we know with willows they have nodes all along the length of the stem that can either turn into roots or shoots depending on if they're exposed to soil or air. So in the places where I'm adding this muddy slurry, that's where we're promoting root growth. And then in the places that I'm leaving open, that's where we're promoting shoots, leaves, aerial parts. And so that way we'll have a mosaic across the whole bundle. This is also a chance to fill in if there are places where the trench was too deep or there's a bend in the willow cutting that creates a lot of air. If you have a long section like that and you want to, you can fill it in. The nice thing about all of this work is you get to be creative. There's not often a right or wrong way to do it. There are general principles that you want to follow. Once you understand those principles, it's really fun because you get to play with the mud and the water, the cuttings and the wedges. If you involve students, I found that my students absolutely loved pounding the wedges in. They would have pounded way more than I was prepared to do that day. Some of the students really enjoyed working with the mud and getting that muddy slurry in there. So, you know, it can be really fun and creative once you understand the basic principles of what you're trying to achieve. As much as I love going in and caking on the slurry like this by hand, one chunk at a time, probably the more efficient way to go about it would be to fill a bucket with slurry that's roughly the consistency of pancake batter, pour it over the lower 3/4 of your bundle completely. Leave that top 1/4 exposed because you know for sure you want stem and leaf growth at the top there. And then after you've covered that lower 3/4 of your bundle with slurry, then you can go in with a bucket of plain water and just wash some of the areas in patches free of slurry so that you have some stem exposed in a mosaic pattern throughout the bundle. And that way you're washing in your stems even more. You're probably going to increase your stem to soil contact that way and end up with better coverage. And then you can always go in afterward and add some patches of slurry by hand here and there if you feel like you've missed some key spots. Now at the very top, if you want to encourage development of shoots, stems, leaves, aerial parts, one thing you can do is just lift your cuttings a little bit off the soil, and you can use an object to help prop them up that way. In this case, I have an extra dead stout stake that I don't need, that's broken, and so I'm just using that to make sure that the stems are not touching the soil at the top, and that way I'll get some really nice aerial growth at the top. Normally you want the bundle to protrude about 8 to 12 inches above the top of bank. In this case, I wasn't able to find cuttings long enough to do that because our vertical cut bank is so extremely tall. But I got the longest cuttings that I could for the location that I had in mind, and that was the best I could do. So these cuttings were actually harvested right here on site at Tenasket Creek. So I like to use local cuttings whenever possible with genetics that are locally adapted for this climate, this elevation, even this site that I'm working on if possible. And so we came out here to Tenasket Creek in early March with a group of high school students and a couple of staff members from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife who manage this property. And we harvested some willow cuttings and we brought them back to our school and we put them in our walk-in cooler that we have at the Oroville School District for our habitat restoration program. And we kept them dormant until we were ready to use them. And so that's a best case scenario. If you have a way to do that, I highly recommend it. Of course, there are times when we have to order live materials because we're not able to procure them ourselves, but it can be a really neat line item to add to a grant if you're writing a grant application, to hire a local person to go out and procure plant materials from, you know, similar elevation, similar site in the same watershed where you're going to be doing your work. It's a great way to build local jobs, and it's also a great way to get plant materials that are adapted for the site where you're going to be working. If you don't have access to a walk-in cooler, I have often asked at grocery stores, if they have a floral cooler, it's amazing how often they'll say yes, particularly if it's for a good cause. So don't be shy to try to find a walk-in cooler where you can store some of your cuttings until you're ready to use them in the spring. If you want to protect your vertical bundle for high flow events to help it be even more robust and secure, you can plant live cuttings on either side of it just to give it that extra structural integrity. And you always want to bury those at least 50% or more of the way underground so you can get a strong root system. And here is the vertical bundle, freshly installed with all of the elements that we have just discussed. Excited to see what happens with it. Okay, so here are some vertical bundles that the 7th grade Oroville students installed just over a year ago at Tenasket Creek. And you can see some very robust coyote willow growth coming out of these. Let's take a closer look. See if we can find the cuttings that we initially installed. So they're being pinned to the soil with this dead stake, which is made from a 2x4 cut into a wedge. Oh wow, look at this growth. It's about 1 centimeter in diameter after just over a year. And you can see how the new growth just rises straight out of the cuttings and grows vertically from there. Nice job, students. Alright, so in this example you can see that where the cuttings were left exposed to air, where we did not put muddy slurry over top, that is where the aerial parts have grown. This is where we have new stems, new leaves that will dramatically increase the amount of roughness that the stream encounters during high flows. And that is our goal. Here we can see how even though the vertical bundle as an installation was not wholly successful, in other words, we don't have roots and shoots developing all along the length of those cuttings, we still have a new red osier dogwood that never used to be growing here at Tenasket Creek, and this is also a great addition to the site. Because Tenasket Creek is known for its flash flooding and for carrying vast amounts of sediment downstream all the way down to the Okanagan River, our STEM students were looking for ways to slow the water down, to increase roughness, so that we can capture some of that sediment throughout the drainage, grade some of the stream bed where it has incised, and lower the amount of sediment that gets deposited in the Okanagan River where steelhead are trying to spawn. So, our middle school STEM students studied the issues with sediment recruitment, transport, and delivery on Tenasket Creek. They asked a lot of questions about the drainage, had a chance to just be curious and do research. They learned about what restoration strategies work best in each of the different planting zones. And they studied a wide variety of stream bank soil bioengineering treatments, including clump plantings, fascines, brush mattresses, live beaver dam analogs, live cuttings, and more. The vertical bundle is one of the treatments that Orville STEM students are recommending to the organizations that are involved with restoration on Tenasket Creek. We did this project as a small demonstration to show what vertical bundle treatments look like, how to install them, and to share some preliminary results on how our bundles are doing 1 year later. So we hope that this has been helpful. Feel free to reach out if you have questions or if you're interested in getting involved in or learning more about this project.